We are starting on the bottom of 36. I went down the hall to a bedroom with a small bed with brown and green Simba sheets and pillows. Some stuffed animals and toy trucks were on the floor. The window was open and the blue curtain was half in and half out, so I knew there was no window guard. Carefully pulling the curtain back, I stuck my head outside. Down in the yard, people were the size of Tic Tacs, and on the street, cars looked like Matchbox toys. Behind Frederick Douglass was a big rail yard with dozens of tracks and all kinds of trains, and I heard the sharp squeak of metal wheels on a rail. Between Frederick Douglass and the yard was a double row of tall chain-link fence with coils of razor wire on top. I looked at the window frame, and the holes that would have held the window guard were broken, rusty brown screws with shiny silver insides, as if it had been recently snapped. To my mind, it would have taken a hard kick to break those screws. A lock clacked somewhere in the apartment, and I quickly spun around and ducked down behind a chest of drawers. Through the open doorway, I heard footsteps and a rustle of clothes. My heart started beating hard. My breast became short and shallow. I knew if I got caught, I might be the next kid to fall 15 floors. "You got hollow tips?" a voice asked. "$1 each," answered a voice that sounded like Jamar's. $1 each? That's robbery. "Take it or leave it," said Jamar. "Ain't no other place gonna get 'em." The other voice said angrily, "You got me right where you want me, don't you? Risking my life to come over here. And you know darn well that I can't go back empty-handed." If Jamar answered, I couldn't hear him. Then the other man said, "I'll take 100, and I won't be sorry if one of them winds up in the back of your skull." "Merry Christmas," said Jamar. A door slammed, but I heard footsteps in the apartment, and I knew Jamar was still there. I stayed behind the dresser, my heart racing and my body tensed. Darn light bulb. He was supposed to warn me. Now I was trapped. Jamar moved around in the other room, whistling and humming to himself. Then the door creaked and closed. I heard the lock click, and it sounded like he'd left. I took a deep breath and felt lightheaded with relief. Still, I waited a few more minutes before quietly leaving the bedroom and going out into the apartment. On the living room table, there was an open black and gold box, about the size of a loaf bread. Inside were bronze and gray bullets. So, who just bought bullets? Do we know? Jamar sold it to some guy, right? I crawled through the holes in the apartment walls and back into the hallway. Light bulb was gone. He probably heard Jamar and the other guy coming up the stairs, got scared, and ran. What a friend he is. He just leaves. He's not getting my Snickers bar.
I'm not gonna get shot over a Snickers bar, my boy.
If any other kid had done that, I would have been mad, but it was hard not to be mad at Light bulb. Drive-by. The First Baptist Church was in a storefront on Belmar Street at the edge of the area called the Flats. It had once been a pet store, and there had been a fire, and now it was a church with rows of pews and an altar. On damp days, the rancid smell of old smoke still hung in the corners. On the day of Darnell's funeral, the disciples stood on the sidewalk outside the church, wearing sharp, neatly buttoned gray suits with black shirts and ties. Instead of their baseball caps, they wore gray fedoras. Their suits looked new and expensive, and I felt ashamed of the ill-fitting second-hand jacket and slacks Grandma had bought me at Goodwill. So, looking at that section, how does our main character feel about the disciples based on that section?
They're very boss.
Help me out. How's he feel? The suits looked new and expensive, and I felt ashamed of the ill-fitting second-hand jacket and slacks Grandma had bought me at Goodwill.
He doesn't like...
They're outselling him. He feels like they're outselling him.
Yeah, and what does he want to do?
Be like them.
Okay, write that down.
Where?
It's in your it's in your section.
What's that?
It's on the bottom of your page, your back page of your packet.
Is it
Or not the back page.
Simba?
It's after Simba.
Symbol.
I like that we're using that as a reference point.
What are we writing down again?
So you write down, what does this section about the book tell us about how Deshaun feels towards the disciples? So how does he feel? Van hit it on the target. He said he feels like he's...
That was Caden.
It was Caden. He feels like he looks up to them, right? He feels embarrassed by his own stuff. And he's like, dang, they look good. Is that a problem?
Yes.
Why? Because what?
He broke.
We already know that. Who looks up to them already?
Jarrell.
Terrell. So now we have our main character, Deshaun, looking up to them.
And Terrell's.
Terrell's his best friend.
The one that wants to be like Marcus.
Terrell wants to be just like Marcus. All right, we're going to keep going. Nia, wearing her frilly pink Sunday dress, hat, and white gloves, went to LaRue and gave him a kiss, but as I passed the disciples, I kept my eyes down. The sleeves of my jacket barely reached my wrist, and the bottoms of the gray pants flapped above my ankles. Not knowing how to tie a tie, I made up a knot. At the entrance of the church, a hand came out to stop me. It looked up into the small hard eyes of Marcus. "Turn around," he ordered. I did as I was told and felt him press behind me as he reached over, untied, and retied my tie. The corner of something hard jutted into my back, and I knew at once why all the disciples had kept their jackets buttoned. What's in their jackets?
Gun.
Okay. Is it common for people to have guns at funerals?
If the rival gang pull up and they got their stuff in one neck.
You're so smart, bud. Good job.
It's like Caden's like been in a game.
Yeah.
Marcus's hands were quick and sure as he tightened the tie around my neck until I thought I'd choke. Do you want a different pencil? Then he placed his strong hands on my shoulders and pointed me inside. They'd put Darnell in a small, light blue coffin surrounded by bunches of rose and red and yellow flowers. The coffin was open and people were going to look. In the front row, Laquita sat with Mrs. Blake and Terrell, dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. She turned her head and looked at the back of the church. I realized she was looking at Jamar. Maybe she wanted him to sit with her, but Jamar stood with the other disciples and didn't move. Terrell's mom whispered into his ear and she scanned the crowd until his eyes caught mine. He jerked his head and I knew he wanted to go with him to look at the coffin. Like I said before, shh. I'd seen dead people, but never a shorty, and when Terrell and I went up to the front, I didn't want to look at first. But they dressed Darnell in a light blue suit with a white collar and silver tie, and his eyes were closed, so it looked like he was asleep. "My little cousin," Terrell whispered with watery eyes. I put my hand on his shoulders, and after a moment, we went back into our seats.
Wait, he's
Good job. So, it's Terrell's cousin. Terrell's cousin, right? Minister Franklin had begun his sermon when the first shot was fired. Hardly anyone looked up. Maybe we were all used to hearing the gunfire that at first it didn't mean anything, but the louder shots quickly followed.
Bop, bop, bop.
Glass began to shatter and some plaster in the wall exploded. Women started screaming. Minister Franklin ducked down behind the pulpit and Grandma pushed Nia and me down to the floor between the pews. The tiles felt cold and gritty. All around us, people were on the floor, their eyes squeezed shut and their good clothes getting dirty.
Bop, bop, bop.
We could hear the sharp zings and cracks as bullets whizzed overhead, hitting walls and pews. Cold air started to flow in through the broken windows. Then car tires screeched. Footsteps slapped as some of the men ran outside. I slithered along the floor and stuck my head out into the aisle. All that remained of the windows was at the front of the church were jaggedy shards. Outside on the sidewalk, framed by the doorway, Marcus stood tall, his arms straight out, firing big black gun with slow deliberateness. Then his arm went down to his side and faint wisps of smoke drifted from the gun's barrel. He looked so powerful in his dark suit. How does our character feel about Marcus now?
He looks powerful.
He looks powerful. So is it someone he looks up to?
Yeah.
Okay. A few other disciples who crouched behind cars and lampposts joined him. Inside the church, people began getting up. Minister Franklin poked his head out from behind the pulpit. Somebody want to say that phrase?
Damn, I can say it.
Gangsters, Nia grumbled angrily as she smoothed out her pink dress and brushed the dirt off. How do you know? I asked. My sister looked at me like I was stupid. It's Marcus's nephew in the casket. Besides, who would shoot up a funeral? Yep.
Why won't you say it?
I could have said it. I was just saying if anybody else wanted to say it. Marcus came down the aisle, his face squeezed tight with anger. He said something to Minister Franklin and then went outside again. The minister continued the service. Only now, Marcus and the disciples stood on the sidewalk in case the gentry gangsters came back. Cold air filled the church. We pulled our coats on and shivered while Minister Franklin told us Darnell was with the angels. 13 years old, so now he's going to be 13, so it skipped a year. Public schools in the United States are becoming more racially segregated, and the trend is likely to accelerate because of the recent Supreme Court decision forbidding most voluntarily local efforts to integrate education institutes. Because they see the schools ain't teaching nothing, they ain't teaching us nothing, but how to be slaves and hard workers for white people to build up they stuff from they schools. Lyrics are edited for language. Alright, the next chapter is called Out of the Hood.
Wait, is this like?
We are in here. Yeah, we'll read part of it.
Is this real?
No, this is fiction, but it's realistic fiction. It could happen. The project stayed the same, but I changed. I wouldn't be caught dead in the pants and shirts Grandma got from the Goodwill. Now I wore baggy jeans, big hoodies, and chains like the other guys. Your first question on your packet on the next page. It says that same quote. It says, why do you think he changed?
Probably because he got older.
And probably
He-
because
he
he
seen
wants
himself.
to be more like Marcus
Yeah.
and
And he seen more stuff.
Okay, write it down. Write it down. Okay, so he's changing, right? I woke up early and quietly dressed. It wasn't even 8 o'clock, and already the apartment felt hot. In the kitchen, the cockroaches scattered from the counters when I turned on the light. After wiping a bowl clean in case roaches had crawled on it during the night, I filled it with cornflakes and looked at the refrigerator for milk, but there was none. It was the end of the month. We were out of bread, and there weren't enough powdered eggs left in the box for a meal. This wouldn't be the first time I'd eaten cornflakes with water. I was heading for the front door when Grandma shuffled out the bedroom. "Where you going?" she said. "Out." "No, you ain't. Been too much shooting around here lately. Now get away from the door." She crossed her arms and waited. But why did I have to listen to her? Who was she anyways? Just some gray-haired woman in a ratty old nightie.
You better not.
So, this text, the next question is, how has his opinion changed about his grandma? Provide evidence. We just read the evidence. Now, how does he think of his grandma?
Like a lady that's off the street or something.
Yes. So, has he lost respect for her?
Yes.
Okay, write it down. I'm going to keep reading as you answer, just so we get a little bit done before the end of the day. I put my hand to the doorknob. "You'll be sorry," Grandma warned. I started to turn the knob, but something was holding me back. All those years of being a good boy, always doing what I was told. "I won't go far. I'll be okay, Grandma, really." "You don't know what you'll be, child," Grandma said, and the veneer of sternness giving way unexpectedly to something sad and defeated. "But I do." "Just because I'm going out doesn't mean I'll join the disciples," I said, pulling the door open. "Just because you're going out doesn't mean you'll guarantee that you'll come back," Grandma muttered. So, Grandma is worried still about him and if he'll come back. I hung my head, unable to look her in the eyes, but felt a call from the outside that I couldn't resist. The sun was bright and a few people were going to church. The men were in shirt sleeves, and some of the women carried umbrellas to shade themselves. Lightbulb was sitting on the back of the bench nearest our building, writing in a book. A little nappy-haired girl about 8 was playing with a doll in front of the bench. She was wearing a stained green jumper and had a lollipop in her mouth. "Hey, Lollipop," I said. Lightbulb's sister looked up at me and grinned. Some gaps where her baby teeth had fallen out. The lollipop bulged in her cheeks. "You watching her?" I asked Lightbulb. He nodded. "Till Mama gets back from the store." I looked over his shoulder. "What's that?" "Sudokus." He tore a page from the book and gave it to me. The page said easy, but it wasn't. I worked at it for a while and then got bored and quit. Meanwhile, Lightbulb worked on a puzzle on the super hard part of the book. In no time, he'd finished it and turned to the puzzle on the next page. Someone who didn't know him might have thought he was faking, but he wasn't. The sun rose higher and the day grew hotter. Women came out with their babies and strollers and sat in whatever shade they could find. Some older guys squatted near a wall, playing hip-hop on a boombox while they smoked and shot dice. Lightbulb's mom returned and took Lollipop. Terrell came out wearing a sleeveless white t-shirt, his pants so low it was hard to understand why they didn't slide down to his ankles. He slid his earring into his ear and turned the bill of his cap to the right. "Sup," he said. "Just chillin'." "Cooking more like it," Lightbulb said, but now he'd finished all the super hard puzzles and was wearing the book open to the middle on his head to keep the sun off. A car horn honked. A police officer had stopped at the curb, and inside, Officer Patterson wagged his finger at me, but I didn't move. "Ain't you gonna talk to your friend?" Terrell said. Those days were over. Officer Patterson and I exchanged a long look, and then he drove back into traffic. Terrell bounced from foot to foot, jittery like a dope friend who can't find a fix. Only Terrell was no addict. "I gotta get out of here," he said. "Sometimes I just can't take this place one more minute. Look at it. Everything's broken and dead. It's like the last place on earth." I knew what he meant, except for the weeds, and the ground was bare and dusty. Broken glass glittered in the sun, and here and there lay a discarded Pampers. Just a few years ago, we'd happily run around and played our games here. It never occurred to us that there was anything wrong, but now it seemed like we'd grown a new set of eyes. So his opinion has changed, right? "Want to take a walk?" I said. Terrell shook his head. "Too hot. Wish there was some air-conditioned place to go." "The bus," Lightbulb said. Terrell grinned. Neither he nor I would have thought of that. "Let's bounce." "Where?" Lightbulb said nervously. "Doesn't matter," Terrell said. "We'll stay till it comes back." We spent enough time sitting on the bench watching traffic to get to know that sooner or later the buses always came back. "I better not," Lightbulb said. "You a mama's boy?" Terrell taunted him. "No," Lightbulb insisted. "Prove it." Lightbulb looked at me. "You're going to do it, Deshaun?" I nodded, not letting on that I was probably as nervous as he was. We waited at the bus stop where Grandma stood in the morning when she went to clean houses. When the bus came, Terrell led us to the middle doors where people usually got off. The three of us squeezed into a seat, and the air condition poured over us like a cool, welcoming breeze. "Uh-oh," Lightbulb goes. The driver was frowning in the rearview mirror. "He won't do nothing," said Terrell. He was right. The bus pulled into traffic, and before long we were in a different world, where the buildings were twice as high as the Douglas,